Hey guys, it's Preacher. For any of you who don't know me, I make WoW guides for every single spec and class in World of Warcraft and have them for a while. I've been a long-term player, playing in world first guilds and so on and so forth. I just wanted to make this video because I've just recently done the Paladin class guides for my YouTube channel. And there's a huge problem there which was apparent across it, and Paladins need a huge overhaul, in my opinion. They really, really do. They are in a place right now that I have never seen a class overall in a worse position, especially when looking for the aspects of new players joining the game. Paladins are a very attractive class to new players. They have brilliant graphics, they look spectacular in most of their gear, and they absolutely come across as being wonderfully designed. In fact, a lot of their talents have simple names which are just better than most people. If we have a look at a quick number of talents: Holy Prism, Execution Sentence, Sanctified Wrath, Light's Hammer, Selfless Healer, Clemency, Divine Purpose, Burden of Guilt, the Long Arm of the Lord, to name a few, are wonderfully named talents that inspire players old and new to give this class a try. Now, the problem comes into the actual gameplay of the Paladin class in all three specs, which is why it's a problem. I have never had an issue with maybe one of the specs suffering a little bit or being slightly behind its other choices. But with the Paladin being in such a unique position of having access to all three roles in World of Warcraft, it feels to me that all three specs are not broken. They produce the results. There is no doubt about that. They definitely produce the results in all three specs. The DPS of Ret is fine. The DPS and tanking of Protection is fine. The healing output of the Holy Paladin is fine. It's how we achieve those things and how confusing it is to new players to play this class and to feel like they're doing things correctly. Let's look at Holy to begin with. Holy has one of the most vast toolboxes of any healer in the game. They're comparable to a Holy Priest in terms of what spells can attribute to which situation. We have good, solid single target heals. We have very powerful AoE heals. The problem comes into when we're in a raid environment where these guys are going to start playing the Holy Paladin to its max, is where we actually feel like we're put in a box of generating holy power so we can fire off singular abilities like Light of Dawn repeatedly. And the playstyle just drops to absolute nonsense by that point. By that point, we are literally trapped into a situation of generating as many holy powers as possible to cast off a Light of Dawn, be that via Holy Radiance or through Holy Shock. And that's it. We may throw in some single heals here and there, but ultimately the best HPS we can produce on a Holy Paladin is by mixing and just get as many holy power charges as possible, and then when the AoE healing is needed, use those AoE heals, and that's it. There's nothing more to it, nothing more complex than that, nothing more interesting than that, and that is my big issue with Holy. It was purely a very boring spec to play for me. After playing Resto Shamans, Holy Priest, even the Disc Priest in the struggling position it's in now, was far more interesting to me than a Holy Paladin. Of course, this is only my opinion, but I have asked various players who are still playing world first guilds what is their opinion, and they've left the class behind. They have literally, one of them has re-rolled away. The other Paladins that I have spoke to have both said they are extremely bored with their class. There's no complexity to it. There's no difficulty to it. They are pigeonholed into either, oh, I can do straight up single target healing, in which case I'm Holy Shocking and then dropping Eternal Flames and keeping up with some Holy Lights in between, or I am then pigeonholed into just AoE healing, which is just using Holy Radiance to generate holy power and then using Light of Dawn as much as possible. It produces the same results, but it's an incredibly dull aspect of the gameplay. Let's move on to Retribution. Retribution is producing good DPS, but the mechanics of the class are all mixed up and broken and confusing, and to a new player especially, they're going to be very, very confused. Let's look at the AoE rotation of a Ret Paladin. Divine Storm or Templar's Verdict. Well, you would assume that if you've got one or two mobs, that using your single target ability instead of your AoE finisher would make sense. Well, that's not the case for Retribution Paladins. If you have two targets, you start using your AoE finisher. That's confusing. But then they mix in Hammer of the Righteous, which has now been added to the Retribution Paladin. Now, it would seem that if you have a couple of mobs to cleave, that Hammer of the Righteous would make sense. But in fact, Hammer of the Righteous is only an upgrade in DPS from AoE at about 4 or 5 mobs. That's confusing, because this is your AoE finisher, and now we have a disparity between Divine Storm and Hammer of the Righteous. Then we have Seal of the Righteous, our AoE seal. It would make total sense at about 3 or 4 mobs if we're doing AoE damage that we would use our AoE seal. Well, that's not a DPS increase. In fact, staying on a single target is a DPS increase. When we get to 6 or 7 mobs, then we change the seal. And now we have a huge disparity again between when to use our AoE. 2 mobs, we're using Divine Storm. A couple more mobs, then we'll start using Hammer of the Righteous. A couple more mobs, then we'll use Seal of the Righteous. That is incredibly confusing. What we actually want to see is, am I AoEing here or am I single targeting? If I'm AoEing, I should be using all my AoE spells, instead of this slow, upgraded process where I'm constantly having to change my mind about what I'm doing with my AoE. It's just confusing, it makes no sense. On top of that, Retribution has the ability to be God mode in terms of its burst with its cooldowns, and then wait for those cooldowns to come back. That is not an interesting playstyle. Sure, burst and DPS cooldowns are always fun, there's no doubt about that, but them all stacking up and then not lining up again is a terrible aspect of the gameplay. It really is. Let's look at, let's say, Holy Avenger. If we have Holy Avenger, it's a 2-minute cooldown. Avenging Wrath is a 3-minute cooldown. Guardian of the Ancient Kings is a 5-minute cooldown. These cooldowns do not line up nicely. It doesn't work well. There's a really poor synergy going on there. On top of the fact that we're tracking now 3 independent cooldowns, while also deciding what spell am I using here. Should I use my AoE finisher just because I have 2 mobs? Common sense says no, you shouldn't. If you have 2 mobs, you should probably be using your hard-hitting single target finisher, which in fact is just not the case. And now we're moving between the different AoE spells that I've talked about earlier. It's very confusing, it's not fun, it's just uninteresting. Let's talk about Protection. Protection is still stuck in a place where it is mixing in AoE spells for its single target DPS. We're mixing in Consecration and our Holy Wrath with our single target rotation. That's just confusing, isn't it? If you were a new player and nobody had explained this to you, you would look at something like Consecration, which AoEs the whole ground. Well, that should be your AoE spell. Holy Wrath blasts everything around you. Well, that's an AoE spell. Well, actually, you need to be using those in single target as well. That's just confusing. It doesn't make any sense. It's just weird. Then we move to actually AoEing, and now we're using Shield of the Righteous still, which is our single target spell. But Ret has a Divine Storm, which is an AoE finisher. If we have all these AoE spells, shouldn't we be using some sort of AoE finisher in combination with those things? Well, common sense says we should be. Yes, we should. Probably Holy Wrath would be a nice AoE finisher. A Holy Wrath finisher uses 3 Holy Power. A simple change like that would make total sense, and then we would stop using it in single target rotation. We've just made the class more common sense friendly. And I like common sense friendly. I like things to make sense. And at the moment, Protection doesn't make sense. Let's talk about the gearing of a Protection Paladin. It now makes more sense to be gearing for hit, expertise, and haste. Avoidance stats are way below. Now, as advanced players, we can see this is because of active mitigation, and therefore the more DPS and holy power we generate, the more protection we get from using our spells. Well, that makes sense to an advanced player, but for a new player who sees things like dodge parry, they think, well, that is obviously a tank stat, isn't it? Dodge parry gear should be a tanking piece of gear. They don't realise that that is actually negatively impacting their gameplay. That's just not working, is it? Common sense tells you that if you see an item with dodge, parry, all these kind of things dropping, that should be tank gear. Because I am a tank, I want to avoid attacks. Common sense tells you that's what you should be doing. And by doing that, players are just becoming confused and actually getting it wrong. You shouldn't actually be doing that. You should be taking DPS gear. You should be effectively taking any haste, mastery, DPS gear you can get your hands on, because you will be a better tank for it. That is, again, very confusing, and it makes no sense. It absolutely doesn't make any sense. The playstyle is just bizarre. It's completely bizarre. It's been bizarre for a while, but they've still maintained this bizarre playstyle of a combination of 1, 2, if we say Holy Wrath, Avenger's Shield, Crusader Strike, Consecration, your level 90 talent, and Judgment. That's 6 different spells to be interweaved on all different cooldowns. So people are just mindlessly spamming whatever isn't on cooldown, and getting reasonable results out of it as well. If they would mix in Shield of the Righteous, that's 7 abilities just to play the class. 7 abilities just to be doing normal tanking is ridiculous. It's far too many. It doesn't make any sense. 2 of those, or 3 of those, are actually AoE abilities. Depending on your level 90 talent, you could say 4 of those are AoE abilities. So 4 out of 7 of our abilities to tank are AoE abilities. That doesn't make any sense from a common sense, logical point of view. This class needs seriously looking at. I'm worried about it. I'm worried that this just being pigeonholed and they're trying to do small changes to it. And anybody playing a Paladin now is not only feeling bored, but frustrated and confused. They're now having to cope in dungeons as a tank with saying, I need that gear. It's better for me than the dodge parry gear that dropped earlier in the dungeon. And the DPS is saying, how can that be? You're a tank. Yes, but the way tanking works now is haste, mastery, expertise and hit are more beneficial to me than avoidance gear or mastery avoidance gear. And that's confusing. It makes no sense. It's illogical. It just doesn't work. I really just hope that Blizz takes a look at this and fixes it, because it's not friendly. It's a very unfriendly spec for a class that has a very friendly appeal to it. It has a very friendly appeal to it. And all 3 specs are frustrating, confusing. They're still producing results. I don't want to take anything away from the fact that Ret, Prot, and Holy are all producing good results in raids at this current gear level and when I'm making this video. But the playstyle, how the class works overall, is just not making sense. And it's very, very frustrating. It's very, very confusing. And it's causing problems in-game, and it's driving people away from the class, which is the problem. Some people have been playing this class since vanilla, and they are starting to say, I'm just not happy with where this class is right now. So I just wanted to point this stuff out because it's been annoying me a lot. So there you go, guys. Take it easy. Blizz, do something about the Paladins. It needs a little bit of love. Alright, ballers. Bye-bye.